Welcome to this explainer. Listen, I am absolutely thrilled you're joining me today because we're doing something a little bit different. We are walking straight into the evidence locker to investigate one of the most chilling, legendary cold cases of the 19th century. I'm talking about the 1872 crime scene of the Mary Celeste. We're going to put on our forensic investigator hats, look past all the ghost stories, and use actual physical evidence and modern chemistry to figure out exactly what happened on that deck.
So let's dive right into this case by asking the core question that has literally haunted the North Atlantic for over 150 years. We have an expert captain, a highly capable crew, and a ship that is entirely seaworthy. Yet, they just vanished. You really have to ask yourself, what level of sheer, absolute terror makes seasoned mariners abandon a floating fortress for a tiny, vulnerable open boat in the middle of a choppy ocean?
Here's our case file overview for today. We'll cover the silent crime scene, the profiles of the missing, dismissing false leads, the forensic breakthrough, and the final tragic choice.
Starting with Part 1, the silent crime scene.
Let's set the scene. It's December 4, 1872. The British brigantine Dei Grazia is sailing about 400 miles east of the Azores when her crew spots this eerie, unguided vessel drifting in the rough seas. Her sails are a mess, some are completely missing, and she's totally unresponsive to signals. When the captain of the Dei Grazia orders a boarding party over there, they find a really startling contrast of evidence. Look at this list. They found a cargo of 1,701 barrels of industrial alcohol, basically intact, right alongside a 6-month supply of food and water. Down below, the crew's personal boots, their pipes, foul-weather gear, even a sheathed sword under the captain's bed, all completely undisturbed. But here's what's missing. The ship's single-yawl lifeboat, the captain's navigational instruments, the ship's papers, and of course, the 10 souls on board. This tells us a massive story. A sailor does not leave his boots behind unless he expects to return in minutes or if he is in an incredibly desperate panic. They systematically took exactly what they needed to survive in an open boat and absolutely nothing else.
Now, the boarding party also found 3.5 feet of water sloshing around in the ship's hold. To a landlubber, sure, that sounds like a sinking ship, but to maritime investigators, a ship of this size could easily handle that amount of water. It was not a fatal volume. The ship was totally seaworthy and could have sailed another 1,000 miles. They also found a makeshift sounding rod, the tool used to measure water depth, just abandoned on the deck, and the heavy covers for the fore and lazarette hatches had been completely removed and tossed aside.
Moving to Part 2, Profiles of the Missing.
To truly understand this bizarre crime scene, we've got to prove that the victims were rational, experienced people. These weren't amateurs prone to silly mistakes. Captain Benjamin Spooner Briggs was a highly respected, meticulous mariner with a spotless professional record. Just days before leaving New York, he wrote to his mother, saying, "Our vessel is in beautiful trim, and I hope we shall have a fine passage." He had actually just invested his entire life savings into a share of the Mary Celeste. So this wasn't just a gig for him. This ship was his livelihood. He was not a reckless guy.
But here is where it gets really heavy. To understand the human element, we have to remember who else was on board. Accompanying Captain Briggs on this voyage to Italy were his wife Sarah and their 2-year-old daughter Sophia. They actually left their 7-year-old son Arthur back home in Massachusetts for school. Put yourself in Briggs's shoes for a second. Think about the unimaginable terror it would take for a protective father to look at a perfectly floating ship and instead order his wife and his toddler into a tiny, open yawl boat in the middle of the dark, violent Atlantic. Whatever threat he saw, it had to be absolute.
All right, Part 3, Dismissing False Leads.
We have got to separate fact from fiction here and clear the room of the junk science and sensationalism that unfortunately clouded all the 19th century courts and newspapers. We can cross these theories off our board pretty quickly, using basic forensic logic. Look, a giant squid is not going to stop to pack the captain's navigational tools before eating everyone, right? Pirates would have absolutely stolen the cargo and valuables, but nothing was touched. A drunken mutiny makes zero sense because the crew had peaceful, impeccable records. And that famous fictionalized account by Arthur Conan Doyle, just a sensational story that actually caused people to misspell the ship's name as Mary Celeste for decades.
When the ship was eventually towed to Gibraltar, the salvage hearings were led by Attorney General Frederick Solly Flood. And this guy was desperately convinced the crew got drunk on the cargo and murdered everyone. He pointed to what he claimed were bloodstains on the captain's sword and deep axe marks on the ship's rail. But early scientific analysis completely debunked this. The supposed blood? Just ordinary rust. The axe marks? Just natural wear and tear from the sea. There was literally zero evidence of foul play.
Which brings us to Part 4,
the forensic breakthrough.
With all those myths and 19th century junk science out of the way, we can finally look at the modern forensic chemistry that blows this mystery wide open. This right here is our primary culprit. Remember that cargo of 1,701 barrels of alcohol? Well, 1,692 of those were made of white oak, which is dense and watertight. But exactly 9 of those barrels were made of red oak, and red oak is highly porous. It's incredibly prone to leaking. When investigators checked the hold, it was exactly those 9 red oak barrels that were completely empty. In the heat of the Azores, those 9 barrels silently leaked invisible, highly volatile alcohol vapors directly into the enclosed hold.
For decades, people completely dismissed the idea of an alcohol explosion because, hey, there were no scorch marks on the wood, right? Well, in 2006, Dr. Andrea Sella, a chemist at University College London, figured out exactly what happens when those trapped vapors find a spark. He defined it as a pressure wave explosion. It's a low-temperature blast that creates this spectacular, terrifying ball of flame, but actually leaves the air behind it relatively cool. No soot, no burning. Let's walk through Dr. Sella's reconstruction, which he actually tested using a replica hold and butane gas. Step 1. The alcohol vapors pool silently down in the dark. Step 2. A random spark, maybe from 2 barrels rubbing together, or a guy smoking a pipe as he opens a hatch, triggers an ignition. And Step 3. Boom! A low-temperature pressure wave roars straight through the hold. This perfectly explains the terrifying roar and those blown-open hatches that the boarding party found. I mean, it would convince any rational captain his ship was about to detonate like a bomb, all while perfectly explaining the total lack of fire damage. Finally, Part 5, the final tragic choice.
Now we take all this physical evidence from our locker and we assemble it to reconstruct those tragic final moments. It's a fatal cascade of events. November 24th, they're getting battered by rough seas and 35-knot winds. By the morning of November 25th, the captain is dealing with a faulty chronometer, so he's 120 miles off from where he thinks he is, and the ship's pumps are clogged. Then comes moment X, the vapor explosion. We can trace this exact timeline of disaster. A combination of terrible weather, inaccurate tools, and a sudden, terrifying blast forced an immediate but what they thought was a temporary evacuation.
And here is the heartbreaking point of no return. The ship's previous cargo was coal, leaving debris that jammed up the pumps. Because the pumps were useless, someone used that sounding rod we found on deck, but it gave a false reading. It made them think the ship was filling with water way faster than it was. Believing the ship was either actively sinking or seconds away from a massive detonation, Captain Briggs